Chapter 3, of Dreams and Nightmares. Pyper, San Diego. Stop. Kino, please stop running. I yelled at Kino as I dashed after him. Don't you see it? It's not safe having you both around me anymore. That was my dream and it happened. How will you explain that? He yelled back. He then stopped in his tracks so abruptly that I almost bumped against him. There's got to be a reason that happened, and I know it's not just because it was your dream, Kino, I said, panting in between breaths. Can you do it again? I mean, will you try doing it again? Kino's face grew flushed, and I bet mine was too. He inhaled sharply and raised his fist. Then he closed them slowly as he fixed his gaze on the ground between us. Nothing, right? I said. Then maybe it wasn't you. I watched the ground for any indication of movement, but there was none. Let's go back to Mayo. He's scared enough to be in the woods, let alone be left alone altogether. Kino narrowed his eyes at the ground and clenched his fists tighter, and no sooner had he done that, there were indeed some movements on the ground before us. A vine sprouted and started crawling over a small patch of earth. Kino gasped. My eyes widened. How? Kino stepped back and swayed in disbelief. He then gestured his hand and a flower sprouted. A flower? I asked. Beats me. I don't understand what's happening, Kino said. How did you learn to do that? Kino shook his head, his face clouded. I inched closer to him. Come on, let's go back to Mayo. We'll figure this out together in the morning, I said, trying to sound convincing. No. He yelled. I have the power of a freak. What is this? I have to figure this out on my own. Will you please stop being stubborn? We're halfway across the world. Mayo and I ran away from our families to be with you, and this is how you're going to treat us? You need friends, Kino, and we're it. Kino slumped on the ground and clutched his head with both hands. He was silent for a while. I bent to pick the flower that grew. It was orange and bulbous, and I was unsure if it was a flower or a tuber. It gave off a scent that reminded me of roses. I sat beside Kino and smelled the flower again. Here, I said, handing him the flower. It's beautiful, although it looks eccentric, I said. Take this so you'll be reminded of what you're capable of doing. Kino did not budge but instead said, Will you help me? I exhaled in relief. Of course, I will. I promise, I said. Look at me. Mayo and I will help you. That's why we're here. It's not because we want an adventure. We're all friends. That's why. Kino looked at me intently with his green eyes that sparkled in the darkness of the night. Best friends, actually, he said. I smirked at him. Now, that sounds better. Kino stood up and reached out to take my hand. Come on, he said. It's time to get back to Mayo. Kino disappeared before my eyes. Kino, I said frantically. Then his body became visible again. Why did you do that? I asked as I grabbed his hand and stood up. In the dream, I couldn't make myself invisible. And that's when the vine started twisting around the Emperor. I wanted to know if that's also true now. Apparently, you still can. And now you have two powers, I said thoughtfully. I didn't mean to point out the obvious. I only meant to say it to myself. As we walked back, I saw Mayo in the darkness. He was a frozen lump against a large tree. I'm sorry for leaving you like that, I told Mayo. He was frowning. I could sense that he had cried for a fair bit if the hiccups were any indication. He kept on tugging at the vines that were wrapped around his legs. Let me help you, I offered. Mayo remained quiet, but he let me set to work on the vines on his legs. In a few minutes, he was loose. Was it you? Mayo asked Kino. Kino was in a sitting position, his back pressed against a stump. He did not answer. Can we please sleep on it? I asked. Mayo stared at me for a while before he crawled back into his bunk. When his body hit the ground, he turned away from both Kino and me. We cannot go on behaving like this. Kino and Mayo were best friends. I was the oddball. It had to be the way it was before, but how could I make them see that? How could I make Mayo understand? I stood up, now feeling helpless about the situation. Will you move your cot closer to mine? Mayo asked. It was a bare whisper, But in the silence of the night, his words could be heard as clearly as a pebble broke the stillness of a pond. I glanced at Kino. He was looking at me too. He nodded as though he understood that Mayo needed me more right now. I dragged my cot closer to Mayo and drifted into slumber. When I awoke the following day, Mayo and Kino were already up. Kino was trying to light a fire while Mayo still seemed distant, playing with an apple. I watched as the apple turned purple. Then Mayo bit it. I stood up, determined to bring back our happy vibes. "Hey," I said as I ran my fingers through my curly hair. "There are still some apples in my pack," Mayo said. I grabbed one and quickly bit it. It was juicy. Mayo crouched down and picked another apple. "Kino, here. Eat one," he said. I smiled as I bit greedily at my share. At least Mayo was making conversation. Kino ignored Mayo, and he kept on trying to light the fire. Then he flew into a rage. "Why won't you light up, stupid fire?" Kino bellowed. I stood up, grabbed the apple from Mayo's outstretched hand, and threw it at Kino's head. "If you won't quit being stubborn, if you continue being this senseless, cratty hop-up's ass, I will hate you," I shouted. Kino's eyes widened. "But talk to Mayo. He's sorry," I yelled in frustration. Kino blushed. For a moment, I thought that he would continue ignoring the two of us. But he stood up and went to where the apple fell. He picked it up and bit into it. "Thanks, Mayo," he said. "There," I shouted. "You are best friends. Best friends. And we've stood by each other in the past. What happened in Canela is not going to ever change that, understand?" Mayo and Kino both stared at me with wide eyes. Then their eyes turned into slits as they laughed. "Of course, we're friends," Mayo said. "It's just that," he paused to give way to his laughter, "it's just the way we are. We always fight." Kino was laughing too. "Girls," he said, munching on the apple. Mayo nodded, laughing. "Way too much drama," he added, gobbling the last few bites of his fruit. "Too much drama? Look who's talking." But seeing them acting all normal again silenced me. Instead of retorting, I sat between them and finished my apple, hoping that the journey ahead would be more relaxed from now on and without the burden of any more silent fights.